Recently, a local viewer in Adelaide gave me this, the Dell Inspiron 710M, and this one had actually survived a bomb blast, so it's got a bit of history behind it, and I think we should take a look at this tiny little, definitely rugged laptop. I was kindly given this laptop by an IT professional here in Adelaide called David. When he received it, the screen had suffered damage due to the pressure wave of an exploding RPG over in Iraq. He repaired the display, and apparently the original owner just wanted their files off of it, and they let him keep it. Compared to Dell's 17-inch Inspiron, it really is compact, and now it's in my possession. I would have loved to have seen the original screen, and it once again shows how tough Dell's laptops really are. But even back when this was released in 2006, critics were tired of this design. And this video is made possible thanks to Guardio, a browser extension that provides real-time protection from all kinds of threats. We put a lot of trust in our browser's built-in security, but what if you could make sure that it's far more secure and safe with ease? Well, that's where Guardio comes in. Scams are everywhere, even in legitimate places like Facebook ads and Google ads. With Guardio, you get alerted and threats stopped before they can cause any harm. Common ones I see as a YouTuber are phishing attacks. Guardio protects you from unknown links that pretend to be legitimate sites and attempt to steal your login information. Thankfully, I realized this before it was too late, and I genuinely nearly lost my YouTube account. But you might not be so lucky, so an extra layer of protection is very helpful. Guardio will also scan all of your browser extensions to see if any of them are malicious or compromised. There are some extensions that pretend to be useful tools, however, they might be forms of malware designed to steal credentials or even install adware. There are lots of other features to protect you against information leaks, harmful sites, unwanted pop-ups, and more. Join over 1 million users today. A single Guardio account covers 5 family members and can be used across mobile and desktop platforms. If you're after a clean and secure browsing experience, scan your browser for free by going to guard.io/pcivrai. You'll get a 7-day free trial to remove existing threats with real-time protection, and using my link, you'll get 20% off a monthly subscription. The previous Inspiron 700 was nearly identical, and the 710 saw nothing more than a minor spec bump. In 2006, laptops, especially pricier ones, included dual-core processors. The 710 did not. This one apparently has a 1.7 GHz single-core Pentium M CPU, very limiting today. But that lack of computing power doesn't mean this device is entirely useless, and with the help of some eucalyptus oil, the casing is clean once again. And no sticker remover liquid required to get this off, thankfully. It came off in one piece, and after a light cleaning, it looks pretty darn good, I must say. So let's power it up and see how functional it still is. And up until this point, I hadn't yet turned it on. Relievingly, it quickly sprang into life, showing us that all-so-nostalgic Windows XP boot screen. A short time later, it was at the login screen. I'm guessing this is the original mechanical hard disk, as it is very slow. And after some fiddling with the trackpad, the left and right buttons were clicking as they should. It is indeed the 1.7 GHz version with an impressive 2 GB of RAM, which, as far as I know, is the maximum that this system supports. As much as I love Windows XP, I think it's about time I try putting Linux on one of these old laptops, after a quick game of Space Cadet, of course. Now to see exactly what sort of hard drive this uses. Being that it was made in 2006, I'm expecting a SATA drive. And to get to it, you've got to remove the battery, which is surprisingly still working. And you've also got to remove these 3 screws. That then lifts up to reveal an old IDE drive. Not exactly what I was hoping for. Being that this model was essentially a carryover from the earlier Inspiron 700, I really shouldn't be surprised. And that means I simply can't slap in a cheap SATA SSD that I've got lying around. We'll need one of these, an IDE to mSATA adapter with an accompanying SSD. I then went ahead and transplanted the connector and metal caddy that holds it in place. I was a bit worried that the slightly thicker IDE adapter with its housing wouldn't fit, but thankfully it did. I asked on Twitter and a few people suggested I try Puppy Linux, which is a light enough version to be viable on such an old laptop, and I made sure to select a 32-bit version. Now, in hindsight, I was doing this wrong for this particular version of Linux. I should have selected a GUID partition table. And for most Linux distributions, you can create a bootable installer by using a program called Balena Etcher, which I tried with Puppy Linux. And as I would eventually find out, this does not work. It would try to boot to the USB, however, nothing would happen. I would later read that Puppy Linux specifically does not work with Balena Etcher. It really always pays to read the instructions. Since I was lazy and didn't want to set up my Windows laptop to make another USB installer, I simply burnt the ISO to a DVD, which in hindsight may have taken more effort. Either way, we are now successfully in Puppy Linux. I ended up going with a slightly older version for better performance. Then it was simply a matter of installing the OS to the new SSD, and I won't bore you with the details, but it wasn't as simple as I'd first hoped. A new SSD is always a good thing to bring life into older computers, and even though this is a very compact little guy, there is no shortage of ports. Most compact notebooks would have done away with the DVD drive entirely, and out of interest's sake, I always open up these devices, clean out the fans, and redo the thermal compound, which was easier thanks to the tutorial that Dell actually provided. This was back in a time when manufacturers encouraged and helped users upgrade their devices. That is not so much a thing today, is it? So once again, I had to remove the hard disk. I may even put Windows XP back on this system at some point. The guide then suggests that we flip it over and begin removing the keyboard. This honestly does share a lot of design and disassembly similarities to the 17-inch Inspiron I covered in an earlier video, which makes sense as it would cost Dell more money to engineer entirely different component layouts, and I'm thankful this is all an easy process. With the small bezel removed, the keyboard could be unscrewed. There are only two holding it in place. It then slides up and out, but be careful not to rip the ribbon cable from the connector underneath. The display assembly also has to be removed. Holding the hinge pins in place are 4 screws. This hinge design has held up pretty well over the years. No signs of cracking at the mounting points, and the various antenna and display connectors are next to come out, and be careful not to damage these as they are very delicate. And if you followed all of those steps correctly, the entire assembly will lift up and out. To remove the top casing, there are lots of Phillips head screws on the underside, all the same thread and length, aside from the smaller one hiding underneath the optical drive. And finally, there are 2 more screws on the other side that have to come out. Also be mindful of the ribbon cable for the trackpad that will still be attached. And along with some more screws, you've also got to remove the VGA connector nuts. Do any of you still use VGA connected displays? Well, let me know in the comments below. And for such an old laptop, it doesn't look too dusty. Probably not much carpet forming inside there. And with the clock battery disconnected, the board can be lifted up from the right hand side. And I did forget to disconnect the modem cable, so definitely do that prior to lifting the board out. And getting to the CPU is pretty easy from here. 4 Phillips head screws hold the heatsink in place, and be sure to disconnect the fan as well. Here's the little 1.7 GHz processor. Upgrade options would definitely be limited, but hey, you can remove it at the very least. The thermal substance appears to be original, and honestly, in such a low-powered laptop, it wouldn't be getting all that hot anyway. And inside the fan, it isn't all that bad. Some minor dust buildup, but I've definitely seen worse. As I frequently say, it's a good idea to regularly clean out your laptop's fans, as dust buildup can restrict airflow quite a bit. And using some isopropyl alcohol, I've removed the paste on the cooler side as well. It's now time to dust out the fan, and off camera I also took it outside and gave it a good scrubbing. Given that this laptop saw time over in Iraq, there is a chance that a lot of the dust and dirt in here could have originated from the battlefield. It would also be easier if I had an extra pair of hands when vacuuming the casing. And on goes my thermal paste of choice, Arctic MX4. And I'm nearly actually out of this stuff, so if you've got any suggestions for future thermal paste purchases, let me know what stuff is best. Putting the board back in took a fair amount of trial and error. You've got to insert the VGA connector into the casing while also placing the board to line up with the mounting screws. And in hindsight, I should have bought another one of these little clock batteries, but since the main battery works, it doesn't really matter all that much. And making sure the hinge is put in place securely and properly aligned is very important. A small dab of thread locker will stop the screws from loosening over time, and it's very handy to have some of this in your toolkit, and it can be purchased from most hardware stores. And with it all back together, let's see exactly what it can do with a lightweight version of Linux. There are so many free games that you can easily access using the repository. This is the case with pretty much every version of Linux. And web browsing was also pretty good on here. Most web pages do seem to load correctly. However, it seemed to struggle with YouTube playback. Still pretty impressive for a single core processor, but like most old laptops, it excels at word processing, and with heaps of free productivity apps on Linux, you could totally use this for school. This came out just before dual-core processors became the norm, leaving it very underpowered in a world where 64-bit CPUs are everywhere. What it does have going for it is its small footprint, and if you're desperate for a laptop, it can still get some work done. Thank you very much for watching, and I have no doubt that this laptop was incredibly expensive when it came out. Having a small, compact laptop that's also quite usable and powerful is a dream that many had, and it's now a reality with a lot of modern Ultrabooks and things like that MacBook Pro I'm using myself. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed the video. I've got plenty more coming soon. Have a good one, and I'll see you then.